My phone vibrated at 9:17 on a Tuesday morning, right in the middle of a boardroom presentation. I almost ignored it. Almost. But something in my chest tightened before I even looked the way it always does when family is involved. The message was from my mother. "As you can see," I said calmly, my voice steady, "if we don't close the latency gap by January, the entire rollout stalls. And that's not an option." I walked back to my office, heels clicking against polished concrete glass walls, reflecting a version of myself my family never seemed to see. I was 32 years old. I ran a technology firm with offices in 3 cities. I employed over 100 people. I made decisions every day that shifted millions of dollars and thousands of lives. And yet somehow I was still the inconvenient one. The irony was sharp enough to taste because while my mother was deciding I wasn't presentable enough for Christmas dinner, I was preparing for a meeting that would define the next 3 years of my company. The Calderon Group was coming in on Thursday. If you didn't know the name, that meant you weren't in certain rooms. They were old money, layered with new industry. Real estate, private equity, logistics, a sprawling family enterprise that had quietly survived 3 recessions and 1 very public scandal. They didn't chase innovation. They bought it once it proved itself indispensable. They had requested a private demo. No press, no junior associates, just their core leadership team. And they had asked specifically to meet the founder. I smiled to myself as I poured a cup of coffee I wouldn't drink. My mother didn't want me at Christmas because my sisters-in-laws were very particular people. Polished, wealthy, traditional. The kind of people who noticed where you bought your coat and whether you hesitated before choosing the right fork. Those very particular people were about to sit across from me and ask for my help. Growing up, I had learned early that my family loved a certain kind of woman. My older sister Julia fit the mold effortlessly. She was warm where I was quiet, graceful where I was precise. She knew how to fill silence with charm, how to tilt her head just enough to invite approval. At family gatherings, people gravitated toward her without trying. I was the other one. The one who corrected facts at the dinner table. The one who asked questions that stalled conversations. The one my father once described not unkindly as intense. When Julia married into money, it felt like a natural conclusion. Her husband came from a family that hosted Christmas Eve dinners with seating charts and place cards, handwritten by professionals. A family where tradition mattered more than truth and appearances were a form of currency. I didn't belong in that world according to my parents. I never had. What they didn't know was that I had built my own. Thursday arrived cold and clear. I wore a dark suit with clean lines and no jewelry, except a watch I had bought myself after our first profitable year. The conference room was immaculate. The screens were calibrated. My team hovered just outside, ready to step in if needed, but this meeting was mine. The Calderon delegation arrived precisely on time. They walked in with the confidence of people used to being deferred to. The patriarch first silver hair measured steps. His daughter beside him, sharp-eyed, evaluating everything. 2 advisors followed already, scanning the room for leverage. And then last through the door was a man I recognized instantly. I had met him once before years ago at my sister's wedding. Back then he had shaken my hand, distractedly asked what I did, and nodded when I said I worked in technology, before turning away mid-sentence to greet someone more important. I remembered the way his attention slid off me like water. Now he stopped short. I watched the moment happen in real time, the second his eyes flicked from my face to the name on the screen behind me, then back again. Confusion. Recognition. Something tightening around his mouth. The room settled into silence. "Good morning," I said, extending my hand as if this were the first time we'd met. "I'm glad you could all make it." He took my hand slowly, his grip unsure. "We've met," he said more to himself than to me. "Yes," I replied evenly, "we have." His father cleared his throat, oblivious to the undercurrent. "You must be the founder," he said. "We've heard impressive things." I smiled. "That depends on who's talking." As they took their seats, I felt the quiet shift of power, the way air pressure changes before a storm. Somewhere across town, my mother was probably fussing over centerpieces, relieved I wouldn't be there to make anyone uncomfortable. She had no idea that the people she was trying to impress were sitting in my world now. And in just a few minutes, they were going to realize exactly who had been missing from their Christmas table. I didn't acknowledge the recognition on his face. I didn't need to. Power doesn't announce itself, it settles. We exchanged pleasantries the way professionals do, with measured smiles and neutral tones. I waited until everyone was seated before I spoke again. The glass doors slid shut behind the last assistant, sealing the room. Privacy, control, my favorite combination. Before we begin, the patriarch said, folding his hands on the table, I want to be clear about expectations. We value discretion. We value reliability. And we value people who understand our world. His eyes flicked briefly toward his son-in-law, the same man who had once written me off in the space of 3 seconds at a wedding reception. I noticed. Of course I did. I understand, I said. My entire business depends on it. I tapped the tablet in front of me. The screens behind me came alive, filling the wall with a clean, elegant interface. No clutter, no unnecessary flourish, just data flowing exactly where it should. For the next 40 minutes, I walked them through systems they didn't yet know they needed. I didn't rush. I didn't oversell. I let the technology speak the way I always did through inevitability, predictive models, risk mitigation, invisible efficiencies that saved money without ever announcing themselves. The daughter leaned forward. One of the advisors stopped taking notes and just watched. The patriarch's expression shifted from polite interest to something sharper. And the man who recognized me, my sister's husband, sat very still. When I finished, the room was quiet in the good way, the kind of silence that follows clarity. This, the patriarch said slowly, would fundamentally change how we operate. Yes, I replied, that's the point. He nodded once, decisive. We'll move forward. Just like that. No theatrics, no negotiation dance. People who understand power don't waste time pretending they don't. As the meeting broke, chairs scraped back, hands were shaken. The advisors filed out first, already murmuring about timelines. The daughter lingered long enough to ask for a follow-up call. And then it was just me and him. He stood by the table, hands braced against the glass, staring at the city through the windows as if it might offer him answers. I waited. Silence is a pressure test. Most people fail it. Avery, he said finally. I looked up. Yes. I didn't know, he said. His voice was low. Careful. About any of this. I tilted my head slightly. You didn't ask. He winced just a fraction. Julia told me you were figuring things out. Of course she did. That's one way to put it, I said. He turned to face me fully now, discomfort written plainly across his face. The confident man I remembered from the wedding was gone. In his place stood someone recalculating past assumptions in real time. You should come to Christmas, he said abruptly. My parents would love to meet you properly. There it was, the pivot, the attempt to retcon history now that the data had changed. My mother asked me not to, I said calmly. His brow furrowed. Why? She thought I might make things awkward. He stared at me, processing. The implication landed slowly, then all at once. His parents. His family. The people he'd just watched commit to a multi-year contract with my company. They wouldn't, he said weakly. They already did, I replied. They just didn't know it yet. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. The silence returned heavier this time. I need to make a call, he said finally. I'm sure you do, I said. He left the room with the stiffness of someone walking into consequences. I watched the door close behind him, then let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clear. That evening, my phone rang as I was leaving the office. My sister's name lit up the screen. I let it ring twice before answering. What did you do? Julia demanded, skipping any pretense of greeting. I closed a deal, I said. You should be proud. It's good for your husband. This isn't funny, she snapped. He just called. He said you embarrassed him. He said my in-laws are furious. I smiled faintly. I didn't embarrass anyone. I introduced myself. You knew they were coming, she said. You could have warned us. So you could uninvite me again, I asked. Silence. They think you lied, she said quietly. They think we hid you. You did, I said. Her voice cracked. I was trying to protect you. No, I said. You were protecting the version of the family that makes you feel important. That's not fair. It's accurate, I replied. She inhaled sharply. Mom is crying. Dad doesn't understand how this happened. They thought you worked in IT support. I laughed then. I couldn't help it. Not because it was funny, but because it was inevitable. I have to go, I said. I have plans. You're not coming to Christmas, she said, accusation layered with fear. No, I said, I'm not. The line went dead. I stood there for a moment, phone still in my hand, city lights flickering on around me. Somewhere my parents were scrambling to fix a narrative that had already collapsed. Somewhere else, a family that prided itself on status was realizing they had misjudged the only person in the room who actually mattered. And I was done explaining. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown number. We should talk tomorrow. I didn't need to guess who it was. I typed back 2 words. We will. Then I drove home already knowing that Christmas was going to look very different this year. By the next morning, the story had already reached my parents before I had finished my first cup of coffee. I knew because my phone started ringing at 6:42, long before they normally woke up. I let it ring. Then again, and again. My father, my mother, my sister. 3 separate calls stacking up like warnings I chose not to read. I didn't owe them immediacy anymore. I sat at my kitchen counter, sunlight barely creeping through the windows, listening to the city wake up below. Traffic, sirens, the distant hum of construction, the sounds of a world that kept moving, whether families were ready for the truth or not. Growing up, mornings in my parents' house were always tense. Not loud, just tight. My father read the paper in silence, snapping pages like punctuation marks. My mother moved through the kitchen, correcting small things that didn't need correcting. The way I held my spoon. The way I didn't smile enough. The way Julia always seemed to glide while I stood still. Julia learned early how to belong. I learned how to stay out of the way. By the time we were teenagers, the pattern was set. She was the social one. I was the difficult one. She was praised for her charm. I was tolerated for my grades. When relatives visited, Julia was asked about her plans. I was asked if I was still into computers. It never occurred to them that computers might one day run everything. The phone buzzed again, this time with a text. "Your father is very upset. Please call us. We didn't mean to hurt you." I stared at the words for a long moment before locking the screen. They never meant to hurt me. They just didn't mind if they did. At the office, the Calderon contract had already begun its ripple effect. Emails poured in from teams preparing integration schedules. My COO stopped by my office to congratulate me, eyes bright with the promise of bonuses and momentum. "This is huge," she said. "They don't move unless they're sure." "I know," I replied. She hesitated at the door. "Everything okay?" "Yes," I said, and it was true. Everything that mattered was. At noon, I finally called my parents back. Not because I felt guilty, but because unresolved systems create drag. I preferred clean closures. My mother answered on the first ring. "Oh, thank God," she said, voice trembling. "Avery, we've been so worried." "About what?" I asked calmly. There was a pause. "About everything. Your sister called last night. She said things got complicated." "They did," I agreed. "We didn't know," she said quickly. "If we had known what you do, who you are, we never would have asked you not to come." I closed my eyes. There it was, the conditional love. "If we had known you were valuable." "That's the problem," I said. "You didn't know because you never asked." My father's voice cut in sharp and defensive. "That's not fair. We've always supported you." "No," I said. "You supported Julia. You tolerated me." "That's ridiculous," he snapped. "We just didn't think you were comfortable around those people." "Those people signed a contract with me yesterday," I said. Silence fell like a dropped plate. "Dad," I continued, my voice steady, "you didn't exclude me to protect me. You excluded me to protect yourselves. You didn't want to explain me." My mother began to cry softly. "We were embarrassed," she admitted. "We didn't understand your world." "I built my world because I didn't belong in yours," I said. Another silence, heavier now. "We want you at Christmas," my father said finally. "Your sisters-in-laws are expecting you." I almost laughed. "Yesterday I said I wasn't good enough to sit at the table. Today I'm required to save face." "That's not what this is," he insisted. "It is exactly what this is," I replied. I heard him inhale gathering authority he no longer possessed. "You're being dramatic." "No," I said. "I'm being accurate." When we hung up, I felt something loosen in my chest. Not relief, alignment. The moment when the pieces finally fit, even if the picture wasn't pretty. That evening, Julia showed up at my apartment unannounced. I opened the door to find her standing there with red eyes and perfect hair coat buttoned tight like armor. "Can I come in?" she asked. I stepped aside. She walked through my living room, slowly taking in the clean lines, the view, the quiet confidence of a space that had never asked for permission. "I didn't know," she said again, as if repetition might absolve her. "I swear." "You knew enough," I replied. She turned to face me. "I thought you liked being private. I thought you didn't want attention." "I didn't want to perform," I said. "There's a difference." She sat down heavily on the couch. "They're furious," she said. "His parents feel humiliated." "I wasn't the one who lied," I said. Her voice broke. "They're asking what else we hid." "That sounds like their problem," I said. She looked up at me, then really looked as if seeing me for the first time without the filter of family mythology. "You're not who I thought you were," she said quietly. "I am exactly who I've always been," I replied. "You just never needed me to be real." She left shortly after, shoulders slumped, the weight of a narrative collapsing around her. That night, alone again, I poured myself a glass of wine and stood by the window. Snow had begun to fall soft and steady, coating the city in quiet transformation. Tomorrow, the Calderon patriarch would call my father. I knew it as surely as I knew the sun would rise. Men like that didn't tolerate disrespect toward assets they valued. And when that call came, My family would finally understand what it meant to underestimate someone who never needed their approval to begin with. I finished my wine, turned off the lights, and let the snow keep falling. Christmas was coming, and this time I wasn't the one being left out. The call came at 10:13 the next morning. I recognized the number before I answered. Old habit. Years of screening taught me that unfamiliar numbers with confident pauses were rarely spam. They were people who assumed you would pick up. "Ms. Flores," the voice said, smooth and measured. "This is Rafael Calderon." I leaned back in my chair. "Good morning. I hope I'm not interrupting." "You're not," I said. "How can I help you?" There was a brief pause, not hesitation, calibration. "I spoke with my son-in-law last night," he said, "and with my daughter, and this morning with your father." I didn't respond. Silence again. I let him continue. "I don't like surprises," he said evenly, "especially when they involve people I respect." "I understand," I replied. "Your father," he continued, "seems to believe that your professional success is a recent development." I smiled faintly. "That's generous of him." Raphael exhaled a sound that carried irritation beneath politeness. "He also seems to believe that excluding you from a family gathering was somehow in your best interest." I stood and walked to the window, watching pedestrians hurry through the cold. "He's always been good at deciding what's best for me." "That may be," Raphael said, "but I don't appreciate my name being used as justification for poor judgment." There it was, the line my father hadn't anticipated. "I wanted you to know." Raphael continued that whatever dynamics exist in your family are not mine to manage, but I will not tolerate anyone suggesting that my standards require diminishing someone who brings actual value to the table. "I appreciate that," I said, and I meant it. "More than that," he added, "I intend to have dinner with my family on Christmas Eve. And I intend to invite you." I closed my eyes briefly. "That's kind of you." "It's not kindness," he said, "it's clarity." When the call ended, I remained by the window longer than necessary. Outside, the city kept moving. Inside, something had shifted permanently. By midday, the fallout was impossible to ignore. My father called again. This time I answered. "What did you say to him?" he demanded without preamble. "I didn't," I replied. "He called me." "You embarrassed us," my father snapped. "He spoke to me like I was a child." "You spoke to me like one my entire life," I said. "This is just new for you." "That man is important," he said. "You don't understand what you've done." "I understand perfectly," I replied. "You told him I didn't belong." He disagreed. My mother's voice came on the line, frantic. "Avery, please, this has gone too far." "No," I said. "This has gone exactly where it needed to." They wanted to talk, to explain, to smooth things over, to rewrite. I declined. That afternoon, Julia sent a message that was longer than anything she'd written me in years. She apologized without qualifying it. No excuses, no deflection, just regret. It was the first honest thing she'd ever offered me. I didn't reply right away. That evening I received the invitation. Formal, handwritten, delivered by courier. Christmas Eve dinner at the Calderon residence. Address included. Dress code understated. Understated. I almost laughed. The irony wasn't lost on me. The family that had decided I wasn't suitable for a holiday meal was now scrambling to control damage while the family they were trying to impress had opened their door to me without hesitation. I didn't RSVP. Instead, I went to the office. It was quiet, most people having already left for the holidays. I walked through the floors, past empty desks and glowing monitors, the quiet hum of servers beneath my feet. This was the place where I had never been invisible, where competence was currency and clarity was respected. My COO met me near the elevators. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "I just needed to be here." She nodded, understanding without explanation. As I rode the elevator back down, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Julia. "He's coming home early tomorrow. Dad, he wants to talk." I typed back slowly. "Tell him to be honest." She responded almost immediately. "He's scared." I paused, then sent one final message. "He should be." That night, I slept deeply. No dreams, no rehearsed arguments, just rest. In the morning, snow covered the city in a soft, deceptive calm. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table, staring at the invitation lying unopened beside my laptop. Christmas Eve was tomorrow. I didn't know yet if I would go, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. If I did, it would be on my terms. My father arrived just after noon. I hadn't invited him. I hadn't agreed to see him. He simply showed up as if the rules he'd lived by his entire life still applied, as if my door was an extension of his authority. I watched him through the peephole for a full 10 seconds before opening it. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically. He was still tall, still broad-shouldered. But something in his posture had shifted. The certainty he usually wore like a tailored jacket sat crooked now. "Avery," he said, clearing his throat, "we need to talk." I stepped aside without answering. He walked into my apartment and stopped short, taking it in the way people do when they've underestimated something. The clean lines, the view, the quiet confidence of a space designed for function, not approval. This wasn't a place you stumbled into by accident. "You live well," he said. "I live intentionally," I replied. He nodded as if that distinction mattered to him now. We sat at opposite ends of the table. I poured coffee for myself and did not offer him any. A small thing, but deliberate. He noticed. "I spoke to Rafael Calderon," he began. "He was very direct." "I imagine he would be," I said. My father leaned forward, hands clasped tightly. "You should have told us," he said. "About your company, about your position. You wouldn't have uninvited me," I finished. "You've already said that." "That's not what I meant," he snapped, then softened his tone. "We didn't know you were successful." There it was again, the word that unlocked everything. "You didn't know because you didn't ask," I said, "and because not knowing was convenient." He frowned. "That's not fair." "It's accurate," I said calmly. "If I had been struggling, you would have been comfortable. If I had been dependent, you could have felt generous. But competence you didn't understand made you uneasy." He opened his mouth, then closed it. His jaw worked as if chewing on something unpleasant. "Your mother cried all night," he said. I met his gaze steadily. "She cried when I didn't fit in. She cried when Julia outshone me. She cried when things were awkward. She never cried when I was ignored." He looked away. "We raised you," he said. "We sacrificed for you." "You raised a version of me you could manage," I replied. "The rest I built alone." Silence settled between us, thick and heavy. Finally he spoke again. "Raphael invited you to Christmas Eve." "Yes," I said. "He invited us as well," my father added quickly. "But he made it very clear that your presence was expected." Expected, not optional, not negotiable. He implied my father continued choosing his words carefully, that our relationship with his family would be affected if this situation wasn't handled properly. There it was, the real concern. "You want me there," I said, "so you don't lose face." "We want our family whole," he insisted. I leaned back in my chair. "You wanted me absent 3 days ago." "That was different," he said weakly. "It was honest," I replied. His eyes snapped up to mine. "What do you want?" The question surprised him as much as it surprised me. For the first time, he wasn't telling me what was best. He was asking. "I want you to stop rewriting history," I said. "I want you to stop pretending you supported me when you didn't. And I want you to stop using me as a variable in your social calculations." He swallowed. "And if we do that, then maybe," I said, "we can talk about dinner." He nodded slowly, absorbing the shift. The man who had once decided my worth without consultation was finally negotiating. "I can't promise perfection," he said. "I'm not asking for it," I replied. "I'm asking for accuracy." He left shortly after his shoulders slumped, the weight of a lifetime of assumptions pressing down on him. That afternoon, I finally responded to Julia's message. "We need to talk, alone." She replied within seconds. "Yes, any time." We met at a quiet cafe near the river, neutral ground. She arrived early, hands wrapped around a cup she wasn't drinking. "I'm sorry," she said as soon as I sat down. "I really am." I studied her face. She looked tired, not from lack of sleep, but from the effort of maintaining a story that no longer held. "You told them I was figuring things out," I said. She nodded. "I thought it sounded kind, harmless." "It made me small," I said. Her eyes filled. "I know that now." "You needed me to be small," I continued. "It made your life simpler." She didn't deny it. "I didn't think it would matter," she whispered. "You always seemed fine." "I was functional," I corrected. "That's not the same." She reached across the table, hesitated, then pulled her hand back. "Are you going to the Calderons?" "I haven't decided," I said. "They're watching us," she said. "Everything feels like a test." For once I replied, "It's not mine." She nodded, something like relief flickering across her face. That night, I stood by my window again, watching lights flicker on across the city. Somewhere across town, my parents were rehearsing apologies. Somewhere else, a powerful family was recalibrating their view of me. And in between, there was Christmas. I picked up the invitation at last and turned it over in my hands. Heavy paper, clean script. No pressure disguised as politeness, just an address and a time. I placed it on the counter and poured myself a glass of water. Tomorrow I would decide, not as a daughter desperate for approval, but as a woman who finally understood her leverage. I decided to go to the Calderons' Christmas Eve dinner at 3:20 in the afternoon, standing in my closet, staring at dresses I had never bought to impress anyone. The decision didn't come with drama. No swelling music, no sudden clarity. It came the way most real decisions do, quietly after the emotional noise has burned itself out, and all that's left is logic. If I didn't go, my parents would spend the night explaining my absence. If I did go, they would have to explain my presence. That mattered. I chose a simple black dress, no logos, no softness meant to invite approval, Clean lines, unapologetic structure, the kind of dress that didn't ask to be liked, it just existed. As I fastened my coat, my phone buzzed again. A message from my father. "We'll be there early. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be." I didn't reply. The Calderon house sat on a quiet street lined with old trees wrapped in white lights. The kind of neighborhood that didn't advertise wealth because it had never needed to. When I pulled up, valets were already moving with efficient ease, coats being taken, names being murmured. I handed over my keys and stepped inside. The warmth hit me first. Not emotional warmth, physical. Wood-stone low lighting, the smell of citrus and something slow cooked. This was a house designed for permanence, for legacy, for people who expected to be listened to. Rafael Calderon spotted me almost immediately. He crossed the room without hesitation, ignoring conversations mid-sentence. When he reached me, he smiled, genuine and unguarded. "I'm glad you came," he said. "So am I replied. He gestured toward the room. "Make yourself at home. Tonight is not about business." "I understand," I said, "but I'm always myself." He laughed quietly. "That's exactly why I wanted you here. I hadn't yet seen my parents. I felt them before I saw them the way you feel. Pressure change when you enter a different altitude." Conversations tightened, eyes flicked. Somewhere behind me a voice faltered. I turned. My mother stood near the fireplace, hands clasped too tightly. My father was beside her, posture rigid, eyes fixed on me like I might disappear if he blinked. Julia stood a step behind them, uncertain, caught between roles. They looked out of place, not because they didn't belong socially, but because they didn't know where to stand. I didn't rush toward them. I didn't avoid them either. I continued forward at an even pace, greeting people Rafael introduced me to. Partners, friends, people who asked me questions and listened to the answers. I watched my father take it in. The way people leaned toward me. The way my name carried weight without explanation. The way no one rushed me or spoke over me. When we finally stood face to face, there was no hug. "Avery," my mother said softly. "Mom," I replied. "This is impressive," my father added, glancing around as if the room itself were part of my resume. "It's Christmas," I said. "The house always looks like this." He flinched. He understood the correction. Rafael joined us, placing a hand lightly on my shoulder. "Frank," he said to my father, voice polite but firm, "I'm glad you could make it." My father nodded a little too eagerly. "Thank you for the invitation." "Of course," Rafael replied. "Avery is important to us." The word hung there, deliberate. Dinner was announced shortly after. A long table, no assigned seats, no hierarchy disguised as etiquette. People chose where to sit based on conversation, not rank. I sat between Rafael's daughter and one of their longtime advisors. My parents sat across from me, my father stiff, my mother quiet, Julia subdued. Halfway through the meal, my father cleared his throat. "We're very proud of Avery," he said, loudly, smiling too broadly. "She's always been very driven." I set my fork down gently. Rafael glanced at me, then back at my father. "Driven," he repeated. "That's one word for it." My father leaned forward, sensing an opening. "Yes, from a young age. We always encouraged her to pursue her interests." I met Rafael's gaze and shook my head almost imperceptibly. Rafael smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That's interesting," he said, "because Avery told me she built her company largely without family support." The table went quiet. My father's face flushed. My mother stared at her plate. Julia closed her eyes briefly. "I didn't mean," my father began. Rafael raised a hand. "There's no need to clarify. I find it refreshing when people succeed on their own terms." He turned to me. "It's one of the reasons I respect you." I nodded. "Thank you." The rest of the meal continued, but the dynamic had shifted permanently. My parents spoke less. They listened more. They watched as conversations flowed toward me without effort. When dessert was served, Rafael stood and tapped his glass. "I don't make toasts often," he said, "but tonight feels appropriate." He looked around the table, then settled his gaze on me. "To Avery," he said, "for reminding us that true value doesn't announce itself. It simply becomes undeniable." Glasses clinked. Applause followed, not loud, genuine. I felt my father shrink in his chair. Later, as guests began to disperse, my father approached me alone. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. "I didn't," I replied. "I didn't say a word." He nodded slowly. "I see that now." "Do you?" I asked. He hesitated. "I think I'm starting to." It wasn't an apology, but it was the beginning of something closer to truth than we'd ever had. As I stepped back into the cold night air, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because I had been accepted, but because I no longer needed to be. The morning after Christmas Eve felt strangely quiet, as if the city itself was holding its breath. I woke later than usual, sunlight slanting across my bedroom floor, the echoes of the previous night still settling somewhere deep in my chest. Not triumph, not relief, something steadier, like a system finally running without friction. My phone was silent. No frantic messages, no apologies wrapped in excuses, no demands disguised as concern. For the first time in days, my family had nothing to say. I made coffee and sat at the small table by the window, replaying the dinner in fragments. The way Raphael had spoken my name without qualification. The way my father's voice had tightened when the narrative he'd rehearsed no longer worked. The way my mother had looked at me as if she were seeing an adult stranger instead of a child she could rearrange. Power doesn't shout, it reorders rooms. By noon, the silence broke. Julia called. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but something in me had shifted. Avoidance felt unnecessary now. Hi, I said. Hey, she replied softly. No accusation, no panic, just exhaustion. I wanted to check on you. I'm fine, I said. How are you? She exhaled. That depends on the definition. We met again this time at her place, a carefully styled townhouse filled with neutral tones and expensive furniture that had never quite felt lived in. She moved through it like someone visiting her own life. I didn't sleep, she admitted, handing me a glass of water. I keep replaying everything. I imagine, I said. She sat across from me, folding her hands together the way she used to when she was nervous as a child. Dad hasn't said much since last night. That's not unusual, I replied. He speaks when he thinks he's in control. She nodded. He tried to explain himself this morning. Said he was just trying to protect the family. From what I asked. From being exposed, she said quietly. The honesty surprised me. I spent my whole life learning how to fit, she continued. How to be palatable. How to be the right version of a daughter, a wife, a hostess. And last night I realized something. I waited. I don't actually know who I am without the performance. There it was. The confession beneath the polish. You don't have to figure that out today, I said. I know, she replied, but I can't pretend I didn't see it. She hesitated, then looked up at me. You never needed the performance, did you? No, I said. I needed distance. She nodded slowly. I think I used you, she said. I needed you to be the one who didn't fit so I could be the one who did. I didn't argue. I didn't absolve her either. That was your choice, I said. What you do next is yours too. She swallowed. Do you hate us? No, I said truthfully. I just don't trust the old dynamics anymore. That seemed to land harder than anger would have. That afternoon, my father finally called. Avery, he said, voice subdued. I wanted to talk. Then talk, I replied. I owe you an apology, he said stiffly. Not for what happened this week, but for a long time before that. I closed my eyes. I don't expect forgiveness, he continued. I just want you to understand that I didn't know how to handle someone I couldn't direct. I know, I said. That doesn't make it less damaging. No, he agreed. It doesn't. There was a long pause. You don't need us anymore, he said finally. It wasn't a question. I never did, I replied. But I wanted you. He exhaled slowly. That might be harder to accept. That's your work, I said gently, not mine. We hung up shortly after. No resolution, no neat ending, just honesty laid bare unfinished. At the office, things moved forward without pause. The Calderon integration kicked off with precision. Teams synced, systems aligned. Progress reports came in clean and early. Raphael stopped by unexpectedly midweek. I wanted to thank you again, he said, settling into the chair across from my desk. Not for the work, for the clarity. I didn't do anything special, I replied. You did, he said. You refused to let other people define the terms of your value. That's rarer than most people realize. He studied me for a moment. Have you considered joining our advisory board? I raised an eyebrow. That's unexpected. So were you, he said, and yet I told him I'd think about it. When he left, I sat alone in my office looking out over the city I had chosen. The place where no one cared who my family was or how well I performed at dinner. The place where value was measured in results, not reflection. That night alone again, I pulled out the invitation Raphael had given me for Christmas Day brunch. The second one. The optional one. I set it aside, not because I was angry, but because I had something else to do. Christmas morning arrived cold and bright. I went for a long walk through empty streets past houses glowing softly behind drawn curtains. Somewhere families were gathering. Somewhere expectations were being met or shattered. I wasn't part of that system anymore, and for the first time that felt like freedom. I turned back toward home already thinking about the year ahead. There was more to build, and this time I would build it without shrinking to fit anyone else's table. By the first week of January, the holidays felt like a closed chapter. The decorations were gone from the streets. The city had shed its softness and returned to its usual sharp rhythm. People moved with purpose again. Deadlines replaced dinners. Ambition resurfaced without apology. I liked it better this way. Work filled the days easily. The Calderon integration moved faster than projected, teams syncing with a precision that made even my most conservative forecasts look timid. When things run well, no one notices. That's always been the goal. What surprised me wasn't the momentum at work. It was the quiet shift at home. My parents stopped calling every day. Not out of anger, out of recalibration. They were learning a new way to exist with me, one where assumptions no longer held. Julia texted occasionally. Short messages, neutral updates, no emotional hooks. It felt tentative, like walking across ice you weren't sure would hold, and I didn't rush to reassure her. One afternoon, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. Subject regarding your advisory board consideration. It was from Raphael's daughter. She was direct. She always had been. We'd like to formally invite you to join the Calderon Group Advisory Board. This is not symbolic. We want your voice where decisions are made. I read it twice then once more. 10 years ago, I would have questioned whether I deserved the seat. 5 years ago, I would have worried about how it looked. Now I only considered whether it made sense. It did. I replied with a request for terms. That same evening, my mother called. Her voice was different, softer, less rehearsed. I made soup, she said, as if that explained everything. I waited. I thought maybe she continued, you might want to come by. There it was, the olive branch, offered carefully without demands. When I asked, tomorrow, she said quickly, if that works. It does, I replied. Her relief was audible. I arrived the next evening just after sunset. The house looked the same. Same porch light, same wreath slightly wilted. Familiar without being comforting. My mother met me at the door, hands damp from the kitchen. Hi, she said. Hi, I replied. She stepped aside, letting me in. My father was already seated at the table, papers spread in front of him. He stood when he saw me awkwardly. Avery, Dad. We sat. The soup was hot, too salty, exactly how she'd always made it. For a few minutes, we ate in silence. I spoke to Julia, my mother said finally. She's struggling. I know, I said. She feels like she's losing her footing, my father added. That's not my responsibility, I replied calmly. I know, my mother said. I didn't realize how much pressure we put on both of you, in different ways. I looked up. That's new, I said. She nodded, eyes glossy. I didn't know how to be proud of two daughters who needed different things. My father cleared his throat. I valued order, he said. Predictability. You challenged that. I still do, I said. He almost smiled. We didn't resolve anything that night. There were no declarations, no emotional release, but something fundamental had changed. They were listening. That mattered. As I left, my mother hugged me. Brief, careful, real. Thank you for coming, she said. Thank you for asking, I replied. On the walk home, my phone buzzed. A message from Julia. Did you really get invited to the advisory board? Yes, I typed back. She didn't respond right away. When she did, it was just one line. I'm proud of you. I stopped walking. Not because I needed to hear it, but because it was the first time it hadn't come with conditions. At work, the advisory board invitation became official. Lawyers reviewed terms, calendars filled. My role expanded without disrupting anything else I'd built. I liked that too. Power that integrates instead of consumes. The first advisory meeting was held in a quiet room overlooking the bay. No pomp, no ceremony, just people who understood stakes and consequences. Raphael watched as I spoke, not evaluating, acknowledging. Afterward, he walked with me to the elevator. You seem lighter, he said. I am, I replied. He nodded. That happens when you stop negotiating your worth. As the doors closed, I caught my reflection in the glass. The woman looking back at me wasn't hardened. She wasn't triumphant. She was settled. That weekend, I declined a family brunch invitation without guilt. I spent the day reorganizing my apartment, donating clothes I'd kept out of habit, not need. I cleared space. That night, as I sat with a book and a glass of wine, I realized something quietly profound. The revenge everyone expected had already happened. Not through humiliation, not through confrontation, but through reordering. The family hierarchy had shifted. The power dynamics had recalibrated. The version of me they could overlook no longer existed. And I hadn't had to raise my voice once. I closed the book and turned off the light. There was still more ahead. More conversations, more adjustments. But the hardest part was over. I had stopped asking to belong. And in doing so, I had finally arrived exactly where I was supposed to be. By mid-January, the world had adjusted to the new order. Not loudly, not ceremonially, just quietly, the way real power always moves. My calendar filled with meetings that mattered. Not performative check-ins or polite updates, but rooms where decisions altered futures. Calderon's advisory board was different from my company. Older money, slower speech, long memories. They didn't rush conclusions, but once reached, they were absolute. I fit there more easily than I expected. What I didn't expect was the email that arrived on a gray Wednesday morning tucked between legal drafts and quarterly projections. From Office of the Probate Court Subject Notice of Interested Party Status. I stared at the screen, pulse steady but alert. My grandmother's name sat in the body of the message. She had passed 3 weeks earlier. Quietly, in her sleep. No drama, no drawn-out goodbyes. No one had called me when it happened. That hadn't surprised me. We hadn't spoken in years, not because of distance, but because my absence had been curated the same way everything else in that family had. What did surprise me was the rest. You have been listed as an interested party in the matter of the estate. Interested party. Not beneficiary, not heir. Interested. I forwarded the email to my attorney with a single line, "Please explain." The reply came within the hour. "Avery, this is unusual. Your grandmother amended her will 6 months ago. The contents are sealed until the hearing. Your name appears alongside your parents and Julia." My breath slowed. 6 months ago. That was before Christmas, before Calderon, before the dinner, before the recalibration, before everything changed. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. This wasn't coincidence. That evening my mother called. She didn't mention the email. She didn't mention the will. She talked about the weather, about a neighbor's new dog, about nothing. Then finally she said we should all be together next week, for what I asked. The reading, she said softly. There it was. "I'll be there," I replied. The courthouse was old stone and quiet authority, the kind of building that had seen families implode politely for generations. Julia sat beside our parents in the waiting area. She looked thinner, tired, not broken, just worn. When she saw me, she stood. "I'm glad you came," she said. "So am I," replied. Our parents nodded, no hugs, no tension, just acknowledgement. The attorney called us in. The room smelled faintly of paper and lemon cleaner. The judge was not present. This was administrative, procedural, clinical. The lawyer cleared his throat. "I'll begin," he said, unfolding the document. "As per the most recent will and testament of Margaret Elaine Harper." My grandmother's name sounded heavier than I remembered. "The estate includes the family home liquid assets and controlling shares in Harper Textiles." My father stiffened. Harper Textiles was the company that built the family. Not glamorous, manufacturing, steady. The source of every privilege my parents had enjoyed. The lawyer continued. "The estate is to be divided as follows." He paused. Julia reached for my mother's hand. 50% of all shares, the lawyer read to Avery Harper Flores. The room went silent. My father's head snapped up. My mother inhaled sharply. Julia froze. I didn't move. And 50%, the lawyer continued, to be placed in trust with dividends distributed equally among surviving heirs, contingent upon quarterly operational audits. My father stood. "That's impossible," he said. She barely spoke to Avery. The lawyer adjusted his glasses. "Mrs. Harper was very specific," he said. "She cited clarity of vision and long-term stewardship as reasons for the allocation." I felt something shift in my chest. Not triumph, recognition. My grandmother had seen me. Not the version they edited, the real one. "There is more," the lawyer added. My father sank back into his chair. "The controlling interest grants decision-making authority to Ms. Flores, effective immediately." I looked at my father. The man who had uninvited me from Christmas because I wasn't a lead enough now sat across from me, stripped of the one thing he'd always assumed was his by default. Control. Julia turned toward me slowly. "She gave it to you," she whispered. "Yes," I said. The lawyer folded the document. "This concludes the reading." Outside, the winter air felt sharper. My parents walked ahead, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. Julia lingered. "I didn't know," she said, "about the will." "I know," I replied. "She must have changed it after that dinner she hosted," Julia said quietly. "The one you didn't come to." I remembered. My grandmother's last Christmas. The one they'd said would be too awkward for me. "She asked about you," Julia continued. "Dad told her you were busy, that you didn't like family gatherings." I smiled faintly. "She always hated lies," I said. Julia nodded. "She asked me once why you never bragged." "I never needed to," I replied. She looked at me for a long moment. "You're not going to sell it," she said. It wasn't a question. "No," I said. "I'm going to fix it." Her shoulders dropped. Relief. Our parents approached. My father stopped in front of me. "You blindsided us," he said. "No," I replied calmly. "She did." He clenched his jaw. "You don't understand what this does to the family." "I understand exactly," I said. "It ends the guessing." My mother looked between us. "What will you do?" she asked. I met her eyes. "I'll do what I've always done," I said. "I'll make it work." That night, alone in my apartment, I opened the file my lawyer had sent. Balance sheets, operational inefficiencies, outdated contracts. Harper Textiles was bleeding slowly, quietly, the kind of decline no one noticed until it was too late. Except me. I smiled. The family had spent decades deciding who belonged at the table. Now the table belonged to me, and they were all about to learn what that meant. I closed the file. By the time the sun rose the next morning, I had already made 3 decisions that would change the direction of Harper Textiles forever. Not out of spite, not out of triumph, out of necessity. The company my grandmother had protected for 4 decades was rotting from the inside, not because it lacked potential, but because it had been preserved like a museum piece, instead of run like a living organism. Sentimentality had replaced strategy. Familiarity had replaced accountability. And that always ends the same way. I arrived at the Harper Textiles headquarters just after 8. The building sat on the edge of an industrial district that had once been thriving and now limped along on memory and tax incentives. Brick exterior, faded signage, a parking lot half empty on a weekday morning. Inside, the air smelled like dust and old coffee. My father was already there. He stood in the lobby, arms crossed, jaw set, as if his physical presence alone might reassert control. "I didn't know you were coming today," he said. "I didn't announce it," I replied. We rode the elevator in silence. The executive floor was exactly as I remembered it from childhood visits. Dark wood. Framed photos of ribbon cuttings and handshakes with men whose names no one remembered anymore. A timeline frozen in self-congratulation. I walked into the boardroom without asking permission. The heads of operations, finance, and manufacturing were already seated, folders open, murmuring to one another. They fell silent when they saw me. My father cleared his throat. "This is premature," he said. "We haven't discussed a transition plan." "There is no transition," I replied, taking the seat at the head of the table. "There is a correction." The CFO blinked. "Ms. Flores, with all due respect." With full respect, I interrupted. "You have been reporting margins that do not align with cash flow for 6 consecutive quarters. I would like to understand why." His face flushed. I hadn't raised my voice. I didn't need to. I slid a printout across the table. "Supplier contracts." I continued. "Outdated pricing models. You are paying loyalty premiums without performance clauses. That is not stability. That is negligence." The head of manufacturing shifted. "We've always done it this way." "That is not a defense," I said. "It is a diagnosis." My father slammed his hand on the table. "You're humiliating them." "No," I said calmly. "I'm briefing them." I turned to the room. "I am not here to dismantle this company," I said. "I am here to prevent its obituary." Silence. Then slowly one of the older executives nodded. "She's right," he said. "We've been coasting." My father stared at him, betrayal etched into his face. By noon, I had ordered a full operational audit and frozen all discretionary spending. By 2, I had scheduled meetings with 2 logistics partners my father had dismissed as too modern. By 4, I had sent notices to renegotiate every supplier contract with performance-based metrics. When I left the building, my phone buzzed. "Julia, Dad is furious. He says you're tearing everything apart." I typed back, "I'm removing rot." Her reply came a minute later. "Mom says Grandma would have loved this." I smiled. That evening, my father came to my apartment unannounced. He stood in the doorway, coat still on, eyes burning. "You took everything he said." "No," I replied. "I was given responsibility." "You didn't earn this," he snapped. "She gave it to you to punish us." I stepped aside and let him in. "You think this is punishment?" I asked. "This is work." He paced my living room, looking at the clean lines, the absence of excess. "You don't understand legacy," he said. "I understand outcomes," I replied. "Legacy without adaptation is just decay with a nicer name." He stopped. "You've always thought you were better than us." "No," I said quietly. "I thought differently. You decided that meant inferior." His face tightened. "You don't need to do this," he said. "We can compromise." I shook my head. For the first time, I said, "I don't need anything from you." That was the moment he understood. Not fully, but enough. He left without another word. The following week was relentless. Emails, calls, resistance disguised as concern. Old partners complained, longtime vendors pushed back, some threatened to walk. I let them. What remained was leaner, smarter, willing to evolve. The board meeting shifted in tone. Questions became sharper. Excuses evaporated. Julia visited the office one afternoon, standing quietly in the back of the room during a presentation. Afterward, she approached me. "I never knew you could be like this," she said. "Like what?" I asked. "Unshakable." I considered it. "I've always been this way," I said. "I just stopped explaining myself." She nodded. "I think Dad is scared," she admitted. "He should be," I replied. "Fear keeps people honest." She laughed softly. That night, I received a message from an unknown number. It was short. "Your grandmother knew what she was doing." No signature. I didn't need one. As I closed my laptop, I felt the weight of the weeks settle into something solid. This wasn't revenge. This was inheritance in its truest form. Not money, not control, but clarity. And there was still one final reckoning left. Not in a boardroom, not in a courtroom, but at a table where I had once been told I didn't belong. The invitation arrived 3 days before Christmas Eve. Not by text, not by email. By mail. A cream-colored envelope, thick paper, my full name written in my mother's careful handwriting, the kind she only used when something mattered more than pride. I stared at it longer than I needed to. Dinner, Christmas Eve, 7 o'clock, family only. No mention of apologies, no explanations, just an opening. I didn't respond right away. That night I sat alone at my kitchen counter, a glass of water untouched beside me, thinking about the last time I had been at that table, where I'd sat, what I'd worn, how small I'd felt without realizing it. Revenge fantasies are loud. Real closure is quiet. The next morning I replied with a single sentence. I will come. Christmas Eve arrived cold and clear, the kind of winter night where the air feels sharpened, as if the world itself is holding its breath. I arrived 10 minutes late. On purpose. The house was glowing when I pulled up, lights warm against the dark, laughter spilling faintly through the windows. I paused before knocking. Then I opened the door. Conversation stopped. Not abruptly. Gradually. One voice trailing off, another lowering, until silence settled over the room like a held note. My parents stood near the fireplace. Julia was by the table adjusting plates that didn't need adjusting. Everyone looked at me. No one told me where to sit. So I chose. I took the chair at the head of the table, the one my father had always occupied. My mother inhaled sharply. Julia's eyes widened. My father froze. I didn't say a word. Neither did they. Eventually my father cleared his throat. You made it. Yes, I replied. Dinner began awkwardly. Plates passed, food served, forks clinked too loudly. No one mentioned Harper Textiles. No one mentioned the will. No one mentioned the weeks of tension hanging between us like unfinished business. Finally, my mother spoke. Your grandmother used to say, she began, voice trembling slightly, that families don't break all at once. They fracture slowly. I looked at her. She said silence does more damage than anger, my mother continued. And I think we've been very quiet for a very long time. My father stared at his plate. I was wrong, he said suddenly. The words landed heavier than any apology. I was wrong about you, he continued. About what mattered. About what strength looks like. I waited. I thought leadership meant control, he said. Presence. Authority. I didn't understand that you were leading even when no one was watching. Julia swallowed. I let him, she said quietly. I benefited from it. She looked at me, eyes wet. I let myself be the good daughter because it was easier than being honest. The room felt fragile, like glass under pressure. I'm not here for confessions, I said calmly. I'm here because I chose to be. They listened. That's the difference, I continued. For most of my life, this family decided who I was. Tonight, I decided to show up. Those are not the same thing. My father nodded slowly. I don't expect forgiveness, he said. I don't even expect understanding. Good, I replied, because I'm not offering absolution. I'm offering boundaries. Silence again. I will run Harper Textiles, I said, fully, transparently, without interference. My father didn't argue. I will not attend gatherings where I am minimized, I continued, and I will leave any room where I am treated as an accessory instead of a person. Julia nodded quickly. Understood. And I added, we will stop pretending that family means obligation without respect. My mother reached for her napkin, pressing it to her lips. We can do that, she said softly. I hope so, I replied, because this is not a negotiation. Dinner continued after that, but it was different. Not warm, not hostile. Honest. After dessert, my father stood. I want to give you something, he said. He left the room and returned with a small wooden box. He set it in front of me. Inside was a watch, old, simple, worn. Your grandmother's, he said. She gave it to me years ago, said it belonged with the person who understood time. I closed the box. Thank you, I said. It was enough. When I left that night, there were no hugs, just nods, quiet acknowledgments. As I stepped into the cold, I realized something. The power shift hadn't happened when I took control of the company. It happened when I stopped needing them to see me. Christmas morning, I woke early, sunlight filtering through the window. My phone buzzed with a single message from Julia. Thank you for coming. I think we can finally start over, if you want. I stared at it for a moment. Then I replied, we'll see. I spent the rest of the day alone, cooking something simple, reading, letting the quiet settle. This wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was better, because it was real, and there was only one thing left to do. Tell the story. I didn't wake up on the morning after Christmas feeling victorious. There was no surge of triumph, no cinematic sense of justice served. What I felt instead was space. The kind that appears only after something heavy has been lifted and you realize how long you've been carrying it without noticing the weight. I made coffee slowly. I stood by the window and watched the city move. Cars, early walkers, a woman pulling a suitcase behind her headed somewhere new. For the first time in years, I wasn't replaying conversations in my head. I wasn't rehearsing explanations. I wasn't wondering how I had come across, or whether I had said too much or not enough. The story had stopped looping. Later that day, I drove to Harper Textiles again, not because there was an emergency, not because someone needed to be corrected, because it was mine. The staff greeted me differently now, not stiff, not deferential, curious, grounded, watching how I moved, how I listened. That mattered more than fear. I spent the morning walking the floor, asking questions, listening to answers that hadn't been invited before. At noon, I called a full staff meeting. I didn't stand on a stage. I didn't use slides. I stood in the middle of the room. This company is not your inheritance, I told them. It's your livelihood, and my responsibility is to protect both. They listened. I'm not interested in nostalgia, I continued. I'm interested in durability. If something works, we keep it. If it doesn't, we change it, no matter how long it's been here. No applause, just nods. That's how real buy-in begins. That evening, my phone rang. My father. I let it ring once, twice. Then I answered. I wanted you to know, he said, I told your aunt the truth. I waited. I told her I didn't understand you, he continued, that I underestimated you, that I was wrong. And I asked. She didn't argue, he said quietly. She said she always wondered why you never needed permission. I closed my eyes. That's all he said. I won't take more of your time. Good night, Dad, I replied. Good night, Avery. I didn't feel relief. I felt finality. In the days that followed, the world adjusted again. Harper Textiles stabilized. Contracts renegotiated, waste trimmed, trust rebuilt. At my own company, nothing changed. That was the point. My worth hadn't increased. It had simply been revealed. Julia sent a message one evening. Graham asked how you learned to stop shrinking. I smiled. Tell him I didn't stop shrinking. I stopped explaining why I wouldn't. She replied with a heart, just one. It felt earned. On New Year's Eve, I didn't attend a party. I stayed home. I wrote. Not code, not strategy. This. Because stories like mine don't end with a dramatic confrontation or a slammed door. They end quietly when a woman realizes she no longer needs to be seen by the people who refuse to look. The truth is, my family didn't change overnight. They may never fully understand me, but they lost the power to define me. And that is the cleanest revenge there is. I wasn't excluded because I wasn't enough. I was excluded because I didn't fit a narrative built on insecurity, performance, and fear of being exposed. When that narrative collapsed, I didn't rush in to replace it. I walked away and built something better. If you are listening to this and recognizing yourself, I want you to hear one thing clearly. You do not need to become louder to be powerful. You do not need to humiliate anyone to reclaim your dignity. You do not need their approval to step into your life. Sometimes the most devastating thing you can do is succeed quietly, set boundaries calmly, and refuse to play the role they wrote for you. That's not cruelty. That's self-respect. My name is Avery Flores, and this wasn't the story of how I got revenge. It was the story of how I finally took my place. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear where you're listening from. Leave a comment below and share your own moment of being underestimated. And if you want more stories about justice, self-worth, and quiet power, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Some stories aren't about burning bridges. They're about realizing you never needed to cross them in the first place.